The grand ballroom at the Marriott downtown was decorated in gold and burgundy, twinkling with fairy lights that made everything look magical. The annual Hartwell Industries Christmas party was always the social event of the year. 200 employees, spouses, and executives celebrating another successful year in the tech consulting business. I should have been enjoying myself. The company had landed 3 major contracts in the fourth quarter, my team had exceeded every performance metric, and I was finally being considered for the senior analyst position I'd worked toward for 5 years. Amanda looked stunning in her red cocktail dress, the one that hugged her curves perfectly and made other men's wives look envious. But something felt off from the moment we walked into the ballroom. Amanda kept checking her phone, her eyes scanning the crowd like she was looking for someone specific. When I tried to take her hand, she pulled away subtly, claiming her palms were sweaty from nervousness about meeting the new board members. "You know how these corporate events make me anxious," she said, but her smile seemed forced. "I just want to make a good impression for your career." Richard Castellano, our CEO and my direct supervisor, was holding court near the bar, surrounded by department heads and their wives. At 52, he was everything I aspired to be professionally: confident, successful, commanding respect from everyone in the room. He'd built Hartwell Industries from a small startup into a major player in the tech consulting world, and everyone knew he had the Midas touch when it came to business decisions. When he spotted us across the room, his face lit up with what I thought was professional enthusiasm. "There's my star analyst," Richard called out, gesturing for us to join his group. "And the beautiful Amanda. You two clean up nice." Amanda's cheeks flushed at the compliment, and she smoothed her dress self-consciously. I'd always been proud that my boss noticed Amanda. She was striking enough to turn heads, intelligent enough to hold conversations with executives' wives, and charming enough to be an asset at these corporate functions. "Thank you, Mr. Castellano," Amanda replied, but there was something in her voice I couldn't identify, a familiarity that seemed inappropriate for someone who supposedly only knew him from previous company events. "Richard, please, we're not in the office tonight." He handed her a champagne flute, his fingers brushing hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Michael, you've got yourself a real catch here. I hope you know how lucky you are." I should have paid attention to the way Amanda looked at him when he said that. Should have noticed how her eyes lingered on his face, how she seemed to hang on every word he spoke. Should have seen the way Richard's gaze kept drifting to her lips when she spoke. Instead, I was focused on networking, on making the right impressions with the board members who would decide my promotion. This was my night to shine professionally, and I was determined not to waste it. The evening progressed normally for the first 2 hours. Dinner was served, speeches were made, and awards were handed out for various achievements. I even received recognition for leading the most profitable project of the year, which should have been the highlight of my night. But as the formal program ended and people began mingling more freely, I started noticing things that made my stomach clench with unease. Amanda kept disappearing. She'd excuse herself to use the restroom, to get fresh air, to make a phone call, and each time she'd be gone for longer than seemed reasonable. When she returned, her lipstick would be slightly smudged, or her hair would look like she'd run her fingers through it. Richard was also absent during these same periods. The third time it happened, I decided to look for Amanda myself. The ballroom was large, with several smaller, adjoining rooms for private conversations and phone calls. I checked the lobby, the restrooms, even stepped outside to see if she was getting air. That's when I found them. Through the glass doors of a small conference room adjacent to the main ballroom, I saw Amanda and Richard standing close together, closer than any married woman should be standing with her husband's boss. They were talking in hushed tones, his hand resting on the small of her back in a gesture that was intimate, possessive. I should have walked away, should have given them the benefit of the doubt, should have assumed they were talking about something work-related, even though Amanda didn't work for the company. Instead, I watched in frozen horror as Richard cupped Amanda's face in his hands and kissed her. Not a friendly peck, not an accidental brush of lips, a deep, passionate kiss that spoke of familiarity, of intimacy, of a relationship that had been building for much longer than this single evening. Amanda didn't pull away. She melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressing against him like she'd been waiting for this moment all evening. The conference room wasn't completely private. The glass doors faced the main ballroom, and anyone walking by could see exactly what I was seeing, which meant this wasn't a moment of weakness or a spontaneous mistake. This was bold, brazen, and calculated. They were flaunting their affair in front of 200 colleagues, subordinates, and spouses. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, my brain struggling to process what my eyes were seeing. This was my wife, my boss, the two people who had the most power over my personal and professional life, and they were destroying them simultaneously. When they finally broke apart, Richard said something that made Amanda laugh, a sound I recognized as genuinely joyful, more authentic than any laugh she'd shared with me in months. Then he straightened his tie while she checked her reflection in the glass, both of them looking satisfied and completely unashamed. As they prepared to return to the party separately, Amanda caught sight of me through the glass doors. Our eyes met for a split second, and I saw her face go white with panic before she quickly looked away and walked toward the ladies' room. Richard emerged from the conference room 30 seconds later, adjusting his cufflinks and checking his phone like nothing had happened. When he spotted me standing in the hallway, his expression didn't change at all. No guilt, no embarrassment, no acknowledgement that I'd witnessed anything inappropriate. "Michael," he said casually, as if we'd run into each other by chance. "Hell of a party, isn't it? Your wife seems to be enjoying herself." The casual cruelty of the comment hit me like a physical blow. He knew I'd seen them. He knew I knew, and he was making it clear that he didn't care. "Yes," I managed to say, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "She certainly does." Richard clapped me on the shoulder with false camaraderie. "You're a lucky man, Michael. Hold on to that one. Women like Amanda don't come along every day." As he walked back toward the main ballroom, I stood alone in the hallway, my entire world cracking apart around me. The promotion I'd worked toward for 5 years, the marriage I'd built over 7 years, the career I'd spent a decade developing, all of it was now at the mercy of two people who had just proven they cared nothing for my feelings or well-being. When Amanda finally emerged from the restroom, her makeup freshly applied and her composure restored, she walked up to me with a bright smile that felt like a slap in the face. "There you are," she said cheerfully. "I was looking everywhere for you. Ready to head back to the party?" I stared at my wife, this woman I'd shared a bed with for 7 years, and realized I was looking at a complete stranger. The Amanda that I'd married would never have carried on an affair with my boss. She would never have humiliated me in front of my colleagues. She would never have smiled at me like nothing had happened after I'd caught her in another man's arms. "Sure," I said quietly. "Let's go back to the party." As we walked back into the ballroom together, I could feel eyes on us. Had other people seen what I'd seen? Were my colleagues already whispering about the pathetic analyst whose wife was sleeping with the CEO? Was I about to become the office joke, the cuckold who was too stupid to see what was happening right under his nose? The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced conversations and fake smiles. Every time someone complimented Amanda's dress or mentioned how lucky I was to have such a beautiful wife, I felt like I was going to vomit. But the worst part was watching Richard work the room, shaking hands and making jokes, completely at ease, while my life imploded around me. He was untouchable, powerful, protected by his position and wealth, while I was just another expendable employee who could be crushed without consequence. As we drove home that night, Amanda chattered about the party like it had been a normal evening, who she'd met, what she'd eaten, how impressed she'd been with the decorations. Not once did she mention Richard, the conference room, or the fact that her husband had caught her kissing another man. When we got home, she headed straight for the bedroom, claiming exhaustion from the evening's festivities. I sat alone in our living room until dawn, staring at our wedding photos and trying to figure out when my perfect life had become such a perfect lie. By morning, I knew two things with absolute certainty. My marriage was over, and my career at Hartwell Industries was about to become a living nightmare. I just had no idea how much worse things were about to get. The morning after the Christmas party, I woke up hoping the previous evening had been some kind of alcohol-induced nightmare. But the sick feeling in my stomach and Amanda's overly cheerful demeanor over breakfast confirmed that everything I'd witnessed was devastatingly real. "Wasn't that a wonderful party?" Amanda said, buttering her toast with theatrical enthusiasm. "Richard really knows how to throw an event. I had such a great time meeting everyone." The casual mention of his name made my jaw clench. She was testing me, seeing if I'd confront her about what I'd seen, and her performance was flawless. Just the right amount of innocent enthusiasm mixed with genuine exhaustion from a late night out. "Did you?" I asked carefully. "I noticed you disappeared a few times during the evening." Amanda's hand paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing to spread butter. "Oh, you know how these corporate events are. So many people to meet, so much small talk. I needed a few breaks to decompress." "With Richard?" The question hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. Amanda looked up from her toast with perfectly calibrated surprise, her eyebrows raised in what appeared to be genuine confusion. "With Richard? Michael, what are you talking about?" The gaslighting was immediate and expert. She wasn't denying anything outright. She was making me question whether I'd seen what I thought I'd seen, whether my interpretation of events was accurate. "I saw you," I said quietly. "In the conference room. I saw you kissing him." Amanda set down her toast and looked at me with an expression of hurt bewilderment that would have won an Academy Award. "Michael, I think you might have had a little too much to drink last night. I talked to Richard a few times. He is your boss, after all, and I wanted to make a good impression for your career. But kissing him? That's crazy." She reached across the table and took my hand, her touch warm and familiar, despite everything that had changed between us. "Honey, I love you. I would never do anything to hurt you or jeopardize what we have. You know that, right?" For a moment, I almost believed her. The alternative that my wife of 7 years was carrying on an affair with my boss and lying to me to my face about it was so devastating that denial felt like a mercy. But I knew what I'd seen. The intimacy of their embrace, the familiarity of their kiss, the way they looked at each other afterward, that wasn't a moment of weakness or a misunderstanding. That was a relationship. "I know what I saw, Amanda." Her expression shifted slightly, the hurt confusion replaced with something harder, more calculating. "Well, if you're so certain you saw something inappropriate, maybe you should talk to Richard about it. I'm sure he'd be very interested to hear that his star employee is making accusations about his personal conduct." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. If I pushed this issue, if I made waves about what I'd witnessed, it wouldn't just affect my marriage, it would destroy my career. Richard held all the power in this situation, and Amanda knew it. "That's what I thought, because you know as well as I do that you didn't see anything inappropriate. You saw a professional conversation between your wife and your boss, and your imagination filled in the rest." She set down her toast and kissed my forehead with patronizing affection. "I'm going to do some shopping today. Maybe you should use the time to think about whether you really want to damage your relationship and your career over some imaginary slight." After she left, I sat alone in our kitchen, replaying the conversation and marveling at Amanda's skill as a manipulator. She had managed to make me question my own perceptions, threaten my job security, and position herself as the reasonable party, all within the span of 10 minutes.
But the gaslighting only confirmed what I already suspected. This affair wasn't new, and Amanda had become an expert at covering her tracks. The weekend passed in tense silence. Amanda went about her normal routine, shopping, meeting friends for lunch, working out at the gym, while I tried to process the complete upheaval of everything I'd believed about my life. Monday morning arrived with the inevitability of a funeral. Walking into the Hartwell Industries building felt like entering enemy territory, knowing that Richard was waiting upstairs with the power to destroy my career if I made any wrong moves. The elevator ride to the 15th floor seemed like an eternity. When the doors opened, I was greeted by the familiar sight of our department. 20 analysts and support staff working in an open floor plan with Richard's corner office overlooking everything like a watchtower. Richard was already at his desk, visible through the glass walls of his office, talking on the phone and gesturing animatedly. When he saw me walk in, he smiled and waved like we were old friends who hadn't seen each other in weeks. "Michael," he called out as I settled at my workstation. "Great party Friday night, wasn't it? I hope you and Amanda had a good time." Every head in the office turned to look at us. Richard's voice carried clearly across the open floor plan, making our conversation public whether I wanted it to be or not. "It was memorable," I replied carefully. Richard's smile widened, and I saw something predatory in his expression. "Amanda looked absolutely stunning in that red dress. You're a lucky man to have such a beautiful wife." The comment was designed to humiliate me, to establish his dominance while maintaining plausible deniability. To everyone else in the office, it sounded like a harmless compliment. To me, it was a reminder that he'd seen my wife in that dress much more intimately than any boss should. "She certainly turned heads," I managed to say. "That she did," Richard agreed, his eyes never leaving mine. "Well, back to work, everyone. Those client reports won't write themselves." As the office returned to its normal rhythm, I tried to focus on my tasks, but my mind kept wandering to the power dynamic that had shifted so dramatically over the weekend. Richard wasn't just my boss anymore. He was my wife's lover, and he was making it clear that he could destroy my career with a word. The first test came that afternoon. "Michael, can I see you in my office?" Richard called out around 3 o'clock. I walked across the floor plan under the curious gaze of my colleagues, feeling like I was walking to my execution. Richard closed the door behind me and gestured for me to sit in one of the chairs facing his desk. "How are you doing, Michael? You seem a little off today." "I'm fine," I lied, "just tired from the weekend." "Good, good. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about the Henderson project. I know you've been leading the team on that account, but I'm thinking of making some changes to the structure." The Henderson project was my biggest success of the year, the account that had earned me recognition at the Christmas party and put me in line for promotion. If Richard was planning to remove me from the project, it could only be for one reason: punishment for what I'd witnessed Friday night. "What kind of changes?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, I'm thinking of bringing in some fresh perspective. Maybe having Jennifer take over the client relationship while you focus on the technical analysis side." Jennifer was a junior analyst with half my experience and none of my client management skills. The demotion would be professional suicide, especially if other employees noticed that I was being stripped of my most important responsibilities. "Richard, I think there might be some confusion about what happened at the party." "Oh?" His eyebrows raised with mock innocence. "What happened at the party, Michael?" The trap was perfectly set. If I accused him of having an affair with Amanda, he could destroy my career for making false accusations against a superior. If I backed down, he would know he had complete power over me. "Nothing," I said quietly. "Nothing happened." His smile was triumphant. You know, Michael, sometimes stress can make people see things that aren't there, imagine problems that don't exist. Maybe you should take a few days off, clear your head. The suggestion felt like a threat. Take time off now, right after the Christmas party, and everyone would know something was wrong. Stay and endure his psychological warfare, and my career would slowly be dismantled piece by piece. "I'm fine to work," I said. "Are you sure? Because I'd hate for personal issues to affect your professional judgment. That could be problematic for your future here." I stared at this man who had been my mentor, my role model, the person I'd respected most in my professional life. Now he was sitting across from me, casually threatening my livelihood while fucking my wife. "I understand." "Good. I'm glad we had this talk. You can go back to your desk now." As I walked back across the office floor, I could feel Richard watching me through his glass walls. My colleagues glanced up as I passed, and I wondered if they could see the defeat written on my face. That evening, Amanda was with
The psychological warfare began in earnest the following week. Richard had clearly decided that subtle humiliation wasn't sufficient. He wanted to break me completely, to ensure that I would never be a threat to his affair with Amanda or his position of power. It started with the Henderson project, just as he'd threatened. On Tuesday morning, I arrived at work to find that my access to the client files had been revoked overnight. When I tried to log into the system, a message appeared. "Access denied. Contact system administrator." Jennifer Martinez, the junior analyst who was supposedly taking over fresh perspective duties, was already at her desk reviewing the files I'd spent 6 months developing. "Morning, Michael," she said awkwardly when she noticed me watching. "Richard asked me to take a look at the Henderson materials. He said you'd be transitioning to other projects." Jennifer was a good kid, smart, hardworking, ambitious, but she was also naive about office politics. She clearly didn't understand that she was being used as a weapon against me. "What other projects?" I asked. She looked uncomfortable. "He didn't say. Maybe you should ask him?" I looked toward Richard's office and saw him watching us through his glass walls, a slight smile playing on his lips. He was enjoying this, the public humiliation of stripping away my most important work while my colleagues watched. When I approached his office, he made me wait for 5 minutes while he finished a phone call that sounded suspiciously like personal business. Finally, he gestured for me to enter. "Michael, good morning. I trust you slept well." The question felt loaded with innuendo, and I wondered if Amanda had shared details about our tense evening at home. "I need to know what projects I'll be working on now that I'm off Henderson," I said, ignoring his small talk. "Straight to business, I like that." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a bug under a microscope. "He thinking of having you work on data analysis for the Morrison account. Nothing too complicated, just spreadsheet review and report formatting." Morrison was our smallest client, barely worth the company's time. The work he was describing was what we typically assign to interns or new hires. For someone with my experience and track record, it was an insult disguised as an assignment. "Richard, I've been leading client relationships for 3 years. My performance reviews have all been exemplary. This feels like..." "Like what, Michael? Like appropriate resource allocation based on current company needs?" We stared at each other across his desk, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was daring me to make this about the affair, to cross the line that would give him justification for more severe retaliation. "It feels like a waste of my skills," I said carefully. Your skills are exactly where they need to be right now. The Morrison project requires attention to detail and the ability to follow instructions without question. I think you're perfect for it." The emphasis on follow instructions without question made his message crystal clear. This wasn't about project assignments. This was about establishing dominance and ensuring my submission. "I understand," I said quietly. "Excellent! Sarah will have the Morrison files ready for you within the hour." I turned to leave, but Richard's voice stopped me at the door. "Oh, and Michael, I had lunch with Amanda yesterday. She mentioned you've been under some stress lately. Maybe we should discuss whether you need some time off to deal with personal issues." The blood drained from my face. Amanda was meeting with Richard during the day now, probably at restaurants where my colleagues might see them together. They weren't even trying to be discreet anymore. "I'm fine," I managed. "Are you?" Because Amanda seemed concerned about your stability. She wondered if work pressures might be affecting your judgment. I realized what was happening. They were building a narrative about my mental state, creating a paper trail that would justify whatever Richard wanted to take against me. If I fought back too hard, I'd be labeled as unstable. If I didn't fight back, I'd be slowly pushed out of the company entirely. "My judgment is fine," I said. "I hope so. It would be a shame if personal problems started affecting your professional performance." The rest of the week continued in the same vein. Richard found new ways to humiliate me daily, reassigning my projects, excluding me from meetings I'd previously led, questioning my work in front of colleagues, and making subtle comments about my stress levels and need for mental health support. The psychological pressure was relentless. Every morning I'd arrive at work wondering what fresh humiliation awaited me. Every interaction with Richard felt like walking through a minefield where one wrong word could trigger an explosion that would end my career. But the worst part was the isolation. My colleagues began treating me differently, not with open hostility, but with the careful distance people maintain around someone whose career is obviously circling the drain. They'd invite me to fewer lunch gatherings, include me in fewer informal discussions, and avoid making eye contact when Richard was delivering his daily doses of professional punishment. I was becoming the office pariah, and everyone could see it happening in real time. The breaking point came on Friday afternoon, when Richard called an all-hands meeting to discuss team restructuring for the new year. As the entire department gathered in the conference room, I had a sinking feeling that I was about to become the main topic of discussion. As we head into the new year, I want to talk about optimizing our team structure for maximum efficiency. Some of you have been carrying heavy workloads, while others might benefit from additional support and oversight. He pulled up a presentation slide showing the new organizational chart. My name appeared at the bottom, reporting directly to Jennifer Martinez, the junior analyst who had been with the company for less than 2 years. A murmur went through the room. Several colleagues glanced at me with expressions ranging from sympathy to confusion. In a single PowerPoint slide, Richard had publicly demoted me from senior analyst to junior support staff. Michael will be transitioning to a support role, focusing on data analysis and administrative tasks. This restructuring will allow him to focus on areas where he can make the most contribution while reducing the stress of client relationship management. There it was again, the narrative about stress and mental health delivered in front of my entire professional peer group. I was being painted as someone who couldn't handle the pressures of real responsibility. "Are there any questions about the new structure?" Richard asked. Jennifer raised her hand tentatively. "Will Michael still be involved in client presentations?"
That will depend on his performance in his new role and his ability to handle additional responsibilities, Richard replied, making it clear that my professional future was entirely at his discretion. After the meeting, colleagues approached me with awkward condolences and confused questions about what had happened to my career trajectory. I gave non-committal answers and tried to maintain some dignity while my professional reputation crumbled around me. That evening, Amanda was practically glowing with satisfaction when I arrived home. She'd prepared my favorite dinner and opened a bottle of expensive wine, a celebration disguised as comfort. "How was their restructuring announcement?" she asked casually, confirming that she'd known about the meeting in advance. "You already know how it went," I said, sitting down at our dinner table and staring at the meal I no longer had any appetite for. "Michael, I hope you understand that this is all for the best. Richard is trying to find a role where you can succeed without so much pressure. Maybe a less stressful position is exactly what you need right now." The gaslighting was becoming more sophisticated. Amanda was repositioning Richard's psychological warfare as a favor, a kindness designed to help me rather than a systematic campaign to destroy my career. "Is that what he told you during your lunch yesterday?" I asked. Amanda's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Richard and I discussed your situation, yes. He's concerned about you, Michael. We both are." "How considerate of both of you to be so concerned about my welfare while you're fucking behind my back!" The words came out harder than I had intended, born of weeks of accumulated rage and humiliation. Amanda set down her fork and looked at me with disappointed sadness. "Michael, this paranoia isn't healthy. You're seeing conspiracies where none exist, imagining affairs that aren't happening. Maybe Richard is right. Maybe you do need some time off to deal with these issues." She was doing it again, making me question my own insanity, my own.
The weekend after my public demotion, I did something I'd never done in 7 years of marriage. I went through Amanda's personal belongings while she was out. The woman I'd trusted completely had forfeited any right to privacy the moment she started kissing my boss in public conference rooms. I started with her home office, a small room where she handled freelance graphic design work and paid our household bills. Her desk drawers were locked, which immediately struck me as odd. In 7 years of marriage, Amanda had never locked anything away from me. But I'd learned some skills during my years in tech consulting, including how to pick simple desk locks with paper clips and patience. The drawers opened easily, revealing a treasure trove of evidence that made my stomach turn. Hidden beneath old client files and tax documents, I found a manila folder labeled Personal, which contained printed emails, hotel receipts, and restaurant bills dating back 8 months. 8 months! Their affair hadn't started recently, as I'd assumed. It had been going on for most of the year, right under my nose. The earliest evidence was an email from Richard to Amanda's personal account, sent in March, 9 months ago. "Amanda, I can't stop thinking about our conversation yesterday. You're an incredibly intelligent and beautiful woman, and I think Michael doesn't fully appreciate what he has. I'd love to take you to lunch sometime to continue our discussion about your career goals. R." Amanda's response was in the same folder. "Richard, I'd love to have lunch with you. Michael has been so focused on work lately that he barely notices me anymore. It would be nice to have a stimulating conversation with someone who appreciates intelligence in a woman. A." The progression from there was sickening to read. Lunch dates became dinner meetings. Dinner meetings became weekend business conferences. Weekend conferences became overnight hotel stays. Each email showed Amanda and Richard growing bolder, more intimate, more confident that I was too oblivious to notice it happening. By June, they weren't even pretending their relationship was professional. R. "Last night was incredible. I never knew it could be like that. Michael is so predictable, so boring in every way. You make me feel alive again. I can't wait to see you Thursday. A. You're intoxicating. I've been thinking about your body all morning. Michael has no idea how lucky he is, but his loss is my gain. Thursday can't come soon enough. R. I had to stop reading several times, the betrayal hitting me in waves. This wasn't just an affair. This was a systematic campaign to steal my wife while mocking me for being too trusting to see it happening. But the worst discovery was yet to come. In July, Amanda and Richard had started discussing their long-term plans. R. I've been thinking about our future together. Amanda, I want more than just stolen hours and secret meetings. I want you in my life permanently. R. I want that too, but we have to be careful. Michael depends on his job, and I can't just divorce him without a plan. We need to figure out how to transition without destroying everything. A. What if Michael wasn't a factor at work anymore? What if his position became redundant? That would give you grounds for divorce based on financial instability, wouldn't it? R. Richard, you're brilliant. If Michael lost his job, especially if it seemed like his own fault, I could divorce him and claim I need to be with someone more stable and successful. No one would blame me for leaving a failed husband for a successful CEO. A. They had been planning to destroy my career as a prelude to destroying my marriage. The recent humiliations at work weren't just about Richard asserting dominance. They were part of a deliberate strategy to make me so professionally unstable that Amanda could divorce me and claim she was upgrading to a better man. I sat in Amanda's chair, staring at 8 months of evidence proving that my wife and boss had been plotting against me since early spring. Every kindness Amanda had shown me, every concern she had expressed about my work stress, every suggestion that I was imagining problems, it had all been part of their scheme. The hotel receipts painted an even clearer picture. Amanda's girls' weekends with college friends had actually been romantic getaways with Richard. Her freelance client meetings in other cities had been cover stories for their affair. Even the business conferences Richard claimed to attend were just opportunities for them to travel together while I stayed home, working overtime on projects that Richard would eventually take away from me. The financial evidence was particularly damning. Richard had been using corporate funds to pay for their hotels, dinners, and weekend trips. Corporate credit card statements showed charges for couples massages, expensive restaurants, and luxury suites, all categorized as business development expenses. This wasn't just adultery. It was embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of corporate resources. Richard had been stealing from Hartwell Industries to fund his affair with my wife.
Monday morning brought a revelation that made all the pieces of Amanda and Richard's scheme fall into place with sickening clarity. As I sat at my newly diminished workstation, relegated to data entry and administrative tasks, I overheard Jennifer Martinez talking to Sarah from HR about Amanda's upcoming promotion. "I still can't believe they're creating a whole new position just for her," Jennifer was saying. "Head of creative strategy for a consulting firm? That seems like a stretch." My fingers froze over my keyboard. Amanda didn't work for Hartwell Industries. She'd never worked for Hartwell Industries. Her freelance graphic design business barely brought in enough money to cover her shopping habits. Unless... I quietly turned in my chair and listened to their conversation, pretending to focus on my Morrison account spreadsheets. Richard announced it in the executive meeting Friday. Apparently, Amanda Thompson has been consulting with them informally on marketing materials, and they're so impressed they want to bring her on full-time. 6-figure salary, full benefits, company car. Thompson? Isn't that Michael's wife? Jennifer asked, glancing over at my workstation. "Yeah, I think so. Lucky for her having connections at the top. Richard really went to bat for her, from what I heard. The full magnitude of their deception hit me like a freight train. While Richard was systematically destroying my career and positioning me for termination, he was simultaneously creating a lucrative executive position for Amanda. They weren't just having an affair, they were orchestrating a complete power transfer, where I would lose everything and Amanda would be rewarded for her betrayal with professional success. I thought back to Amanda's recent comments about my stress levels and need for mental health support. She'd been laying the groundwork for our divorce by establishing herself as the stable, successful partner while painting me as an unstable failure who couldn't handle basic job responsibilities. When she left me for Richard, she'd be able to claim she was upgrading from a failed husband to a successful CEO, and no one would blame her for making such a practical choice. During my lunch break, I walked to a coffee shop 3 blocks away and called Linda Martinez, the private investigator who had helped me during my first marriage disaster. If anyone could help me document the full scope of Amanda and Richard's scheme, it was Linda. "Michael," Linda's voice was warm but concerned. "I heard about your situation through mutual contacts. I was wondering when you'd call." "How much do you know?" I asked. "Enough to know you need help, and fast. Can you meet me tonight? My office, 8 o'clock? That evening, I told Amanda I was working late on the Morrison project. A lie, but hardly the worst deception happening in our household. I drove to Linda's strip mall office and laid out everything I'd discovered over the weekend. Linda reviewed the emails, receipts, and financial records with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every type of betrayal imaginable. "She was playing everyone in your life," she said finally. "All those tears about being stressed at work, all those comments about you needing to take time off for mental health, those were all laying the groundwork for her betrayal." She pointed to the corporate credit card statements. "These charges for hotels and restaurants, if Richard's billing them as business expenses while using them for personal affairs, that's embezzlement. The board of directors would be very interested in seeing how their CEO spends company money." "What about Amanda's promotion?" I asked. Linda's smile was predatory. "Creating a high-paying position for his mistress while demoting her husband, that's nepotism, abuse of authority, and possibly sexual harassment if we can prove she received benefits in exchange for sexual favors. The company's insurance carrier and legal department will go ballistic when they see the liability exposure." Over the next 2 weeks, Linda conducted the most thorough investigation of my life. She documented every hotel stay, every restaurant meal, every weekend trip that Richard and Amanda had taken together. She obtained security footage from parking garages showing them arriving and leaving together. She even found social media posts from other hotel guests who had unknowingly photographed Richard and Amanda together during their romantic getaways. But the most damaging evidence came from inside Hartwell Industries itself. Linda had contacts in the corporate investigation field who specialized in internal fraud cases. Through them, she was able to gain access to Richard's company email account, his corporate credit card statements, and his travel expense reports. What we found was a pattern of systematic fraud dating back over a year. Richard hadn't just been using company funds to finance his affair with Amanda, he'd been using them to fund affairs with at least 3 other women over the past 2 years. "He's a serial predator," Linda explained as she showed me the evidence. "Your wife isn't his first victim, and she won't be his last. Look at this." She spread out documents showing similar patterns with other women, company positions created for mistresses, expensive trips billed as business development, corporate funds used to purchase jewelry and gifts for various lovers. Richard has been treating Hartwell Industries like his personal dating service. He identifies married women in vulnerable positions, seduces them with promises of career advancement, and then uses corporate resources to maintain relationships with multiple women simultaneously. The revelation was both devastating and liberating. Amanda wasn't special to Richard, she was just his latest conquest, another married woman he'd manipulated and used for his own gratification. When he got bored with her, he'd find someone new and Amanda would be discarded like all the others. But the evidence also provided me with something even more valuable than personal closure, the ammunition I needed to destroy them both. "What's our next step?" I asked Linda. "We document everything, build an airtight case, and then we decide who to hit first, Richard through the corporate channels or Amanda through divorce proceedings. Why not both simultaneously?" Linda's grin was vicious. "I like the way you think, but we need to be strategic about timing. If we move too early, they might have time to cover their tracks or prepare counterattacks. If we wait too long, they might complete their plan to push you out of the company entirely." That night, I went home to find Amanda in an unusually good mood, humming while she prepared dinner and checking her phone every few minutes with secretive smiles. "You seem happy?" I observed. "Just excited about some new opportunities," she said vaguely. "I might have some career news to share soon." "Oh, what kind of opportunities?" Amanda's smile was coy. "Nothing definite yet, but Richard mentioned there might be a position opening up at Hartwell that would be perfect for my skill set." The casual lie was breathtaking. Amanda was pretending that her promotion was a legitimate business opportunity rather than payment for sexual services. She was actually excited about the prospect of working directly for her lover while her husband remained trapped in the same office building nearby. "That's wonderful," I said. "It would be nice to have someone in the family with a stable career." Amanda's expression flickered with something that might have been guilt, but it was quickly replaced by self-righteous indignation. "Michael, your career situation is temporary. Once you get your stress levels under control and prove you can handle responsibility again, I'm sure Richard will give you more meaningful work." She was positioning herself as the supportive wife who believed in her husband's potential while secretly planning his complete professional destruction. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired her skill. "I'm sure you're right," I said. "Richard has always been very generous with people he cares about." "He is," Amanda agreed, missing the double meaning entirely. "He's a good man who wants to see everyone succeed." As we ate dinner, Amanda chatted excitedly about her future at Hartwell Industries, the projects she might work on, the salary she might earn, the opportunities for advancement under Richard's mentorship. She was genuinely thrilled about the prospect of officially joining her lover's company while her husband sat at a junior desk nearby. The complete absence of shame or self-awareness was staggering. Amanda had convinced herself that she deserved Richard's gifts, that her promotion was based on merit rather than adultery, and that I was too unstable and unsuccessful to warrant basic honesty or respect. But as I listened to her fantasies about our future, where she would be a successful executive while I remained a diminished support worker, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: confidence. Amanda and Richard thought they were weeks away from completing their plan. Amanda would get her promotion, I would get pushed out of the company, and they would have a clear path to a future together without any inconvenient obstacles. They had no idea that their entire scheme was about to collapse in the most spectacular and public way possible. Tomorrow, Linda would begin phase 1 of our counterattack. And by the time we were finished, both Amanda and Richard would understand what it felt like to lose everything they'd worked for because of their own arrogance and cruelty.
The next 3 weeks were the most methodical and disciplined period of my life. Every morning, I woke up and played the role of the defeated husband and demoted employee while secretly documenting every aspect of Amanda and Richard's affair and fraud scheme. Linda had provided me with sophisticated recording equipment disguised as everyday office supplies: a pen that could capture audio, a briefcase with a hidden camera, even a calculator that could photograph documents. I felt like a spy in my own life, gathering intelligence on the two people who thought they controlled my future. The evidence we collected was overwhelming. I started with Richard's daily routine at the office. His calendar showed numerous executive meetings that lasted for hours in the middle of the day. But when I discreetly checked the conference room schedules, these meetings weren't logged anywhere. Linda's investigation revealed that Richard was leaving the office during these periods to meet Amanda at hotels, restaurants, and her apartment. "He's not even trying to hide it from the staff," Linda observed during one of our evening briefings. "His assistant knows he's unavailable for hours at a time, but she's too intimidated by his position to ask questions." The security footage from Hartwell's parking garage was particularly damning. Linda had obtained weeks of recordings showing Richard leaving the building during work hours, often returning hours later with his clothes slightly disheveled and his hair mussed. On several occasions, Amanda could be seen in the passenger seat of his BMW as he drove out of the garage. But the most devastating evidence came from Richard's corporate communications. Linda's contact in the cyber investigation field had helped us access Richard's company email account through a legitimate audit process. What we found there was a treasure trove of evidence showing how Richard had systematically abused his position to benefit Amanda while sabotaging my career. The emails between Richard and HR about creating Amanda's new position were particularly revealing. "Sarah, I need you to draft a job description for a new role, Head of Creative Strategy. Salary range $120K to $140K, full benefits, reporting directly to me. The candidate I have in mind has extensive experience in visual communications and marketing strategy, RC." "Sarah, this seems like an unusual addition to our organizational structure. Do we have budget approval for this role, and do you have a candidate already identified?" SH. "Budget has been approved by my discretion. The candidate is Amanda Thompson, who has been consulting with us informally on several projects. I believe she would be an excellent addition to our executive team, RC." "Thompson, isn't that Michael Thompson's wife? There might be some concerns about nepotism or conflicts of interest. SH. Michael's marital relationship is irrelevant to Amanda's qualifications. I trust you can handle the paperwork without raising unnecessary concerns. RC." The threat in that last email was unmistakable. Richard was using his authority to steamroll HR's legitimate concerns about hiring his mistress while her husband worked in the same building. Even more damaging were the emails between Richard and the board members about my performance issues. "I'm concerned about Michael Thompson's recent stability and judgment. He's been making errors, missing deadlines, and showing signs of stress that could affect client relationships. I recommend we transition him to a reduced role with appropriate supervision. RC." "This is surprising, Richard. Michael's previous reviews have been exemplary. What's changed?" Board member. "Personal issues, I believe. His wife has mentioned concerns about his mental state and ability to handle pressure. I think a supportive transition to less demanding responsibilities would be best for everyone. RC." Richard was systematically destroying my professional reputation using information provided by my own wife. Amanda had been feeding him ammunition to use against me while positioning herself as the concerned spouse who wanted to help her unstable husband. The financial evidence was equally damning. Linda had obtained Richard's corporate credit card statements for the past year, showing a pattern of fraud that went far beyond his affair with Amanda. "Look at this," Linda said, spreading out the statements across her desk. "February, $3,400 for a weekend at the Ritz-Carlton, billed as client entertainment. March, $2,100 for jewelry from Tiffany, categorized as employee appreciation. April, $1,800 for a spa weekend, listed as executive retreat." Each entry corresponded to documented meetings between Richard and Amanda. He'd been using company funds to finance their entire affair, billing romantic getaways as business expenses and expensive gifts as corporate investments.
The total amount of fraudulent charges over the past year is approaching $75,000, Linda continued. That's a felony in this state, and the board of directors could face personal liability if they don't take immediate action once they're informed. But the most psychologically devastating evidence came from the personal communications between Richard and Amanda that Linda had obtained through their social media accounts and text message records. Michael is so pathetic, Amanda had written to Richard. He actually believes you're trying to help his career by giving him easier assignments. He has no idea that we're planning to phase him out entirely. Your husband is remarkably naive, Richard had replied. I've been systematically undermining his credibility for weeks, and he still thinks this is about work performance rather than making room for us to be together. I can't wait until I can divorce him and move in with you. Living with someone so weak and unsuccessful is exhausting. You make me feel like the woman I'm supposed to be. Reading their private messages was like being stabbed repeatedly with little knives. These weren't just two people having an affair. They were sadists who enjoyed inflicting psychological pain on someone who had trusted them completely. But their cruelty had also given me something invaluable, motivation that burned with the intensity of a nuclear reactor. As we compiled the evidence, Linda and I began planning our counterattack strategy. We have enough material to destroy them both, Linda explained. The question is whether you want to go for maximum damage or strategic precision. What's the difference? Maximum damage means we release everything simultaneously. Corporate fraud evidence to the board, adultery evidence to Amanda's family and social circle, criminal evidence to law enforcement. It's a nuclear option that destroys them both completely, but might also create collateral damage. And strategic precision? We hit them sequentially, using each revelation to set up the next one. First, we expose Richard's corporate fraud to the board. When he tries to throw Amanda under the bus to save himself, we release the personal communications showing their conspiracy. When Amanda tries to claim she was manipulated or coerced, we show the evidence of her active participation in destroying your career. I thought about it for a long moment. Both approaches had merit, but one felt more satisfying than the other. Let's go for maximum damage, I decided. These people have been systematically destroying my life while laughing about how stupid I am. They deserve to face all the consequences simultaneously without time to prepare defenses or cover their tracks. Linda's smile was predatory. I was hoping you'd say that, because I've been planning a coordinated attack that will hit them from multiple directions at once. By the time we're finished, Richard will be facing criminal charges and Amanda will be unemployed, divorced, and socially destroyed. What's the timeline? 2 weeks. We need that long to coordinate with law enforcement, the board of directors, and Amanda's family. But once we pull the trigger, everything happens within 48 hours. As I drove home that evening, I felt lighter than I had in months. The constant stress of wondering when the next humiliation would come. The psychological pressure of pretending to not see what was happening right in front of me. The crushing weight of feeling powerless against their manipulation. All of it was about to end. Amanda and Richard thought they had all the cards. They believed they were smarter, more sophisticated, and more strategic than the naive husband they'd been manipulating for months. In 2 weeks, Amanda would learn what it felt like to be married to a real man. And she was going to hate every second of it. When I walked into our house that evening, Amanda was on the phone in the kitchen, speaking in the hushed tones I'd learned to recognize as her Richard voice. I know, baby. Just 2 more weeks and Michael will be out of the picture completely. Then we can stop pretending and start living our real lives together. She hadn't heard me come in, so she continued talking while I stood in the hallway, recording every word. He's been so pathetic lately, Richard, moping around, accepting every humiliation you give him without fighting back. I actually feel embarrassed that I was married to someone so weak. Her laughter was sharp and cruel.
You're right, though. Once he's fired and I divorce him, people will understand why I needed to upgrade to a real man. I turned off the recorder and walked quietly back to my car. I'd heard enough for one evening. In exactly 14 days, Amanda would learn what it felt like to be married to a real man. And she was going to hate every second of it.
The final phase of Richard's psychological warfare began the Monday after Linda and I had completed our evidence gathering. It was as if Richard sensed that his window for destroying me was closing and decided to accelerate his campaign of humiliation to ensure I would be completely broken before Amanda's promotion became official. It started with the Henderson account, my former crown jewel project that had been handed to Jennifer Martinez. Richard called an all-hands meeting to discuss the account's performance issues under new management. Unfortunately, the Henderson project has encountered some significant challenges, Richard announced to the assembled staff. It seems there were fundamental problems with the initial client relationship and project structure that are only now coming to light. I sat in the back of the conference room, watching Richard systematically destroy months of my work with carefully crafted lies and misdirection. The client has expressed concerns about communication gaps, missed deadlines, and strategic misalignment that appear to stem from the original project setup. Richard continued, his eyes finding mine across the room. This serves as a reminder that good client relationship management requires consistent attention to detail and professional judgment. Jennifer Martinez looked mortified. She'd been doing excellent work on the Henderson account, but Richard was positioning the problems as inherited flaws from my management rather than acknowledging her competent stewardship. To address these issues, we'll need to restructure the project completely and potentially offer the client significant concessions. Jennifer, I'd like you to work with Michael on documenting what went wrong so we can avoid similar problems in the future. The twist of the knife was exquisite. Not only was Richard blaming me for fictional problems, but he was forcing me to participate in documenting my own supposed failures. Jennifer would be put in the impossible position of having to criticize my work to satisfy Richard's demands, while knowing that none of the supposed problems actually existed. After the meeting, Jennifer approached me with obvious discomfort. "Michael, I don't understand what Richard is talking about. The Henderson account is performing perfectly. The client is happy, all deliverables are on schedule, and there haven't been any communication issues." "I know," I said simply. "Then why is he saying there are problems, and why does he want me to document issues that don't exist?" I looked at this young woman who was being forced to participate in Richard's scheme against her will and felt a surge of protective anger. Jennifer didn't deserve to be used as a weapon against me, any more than I deserved to be destroyed for Richard's convenience. "Jennifer, you're a good analyst and a decent person," I said carefully. "My advice is to document everything honestly and let Richard draw his own conclusions. Don't compromise your integrity for office politics." She nodded, understanding the subtext, even if she didn't know the full scope of what was happening. But Richard wasn't finished with his humiliation campaign. That afternoon, he called me into his office for what he described as a performance improvement conversation. I walked across the open floor plan under the watchful eyes of my colleagues, feeling like I was taking a perp walk. "Michael, I think we need to discuss your future here at Hartwell. Your recent performance has been concerning, and I'm wondering if this role is still the right fit for you." "My performance has been fine," I said evenly. "Has it? The Henderson account issues, the mistakes on the Morrison project, your inability to handle the pressure of client relationship management, these are patterns that concern me." Richard was gaslighting me with fictional performance problems, while my real work continued to be exemplary. but he was building a paper trail that would justify whatever action he wanted to take against me. I'm not aware of any mistakes on Morrison, and Jennifer confirmed that Henderson is performing well. Richard's expression hardened. Are you questioning my assessment of your performance, Michael? The trap was perfectly set. If I defended myself too aggressively, I'd be insubordinate. If I accepted his false criticism, I'd be admitting to performance problems that could justify my termination. I'm trying to understand the specific issues so I can address them, I said carefully. The specific issue is your attitude, Michael. You seem to think you know better than your superiors, which suggests a fundamental problem with your judgment and professionalism. He leaned back in his chair, studying me like a cat that had caught a mouse and was deciding how long to play with it before the kill. I'm also concerned about your personal stability, he continued. Amanda mentioned that you've been under significant stress lately, making accusations about imaginary problems, showing signs of paranoia and instability. There it was, Amanda's intelligence being used against me in a professional setting. My own wife was providing ammunition for my boss to destroy my career. My personal life is separate from my work performance, I said. Is it? Because from where I sit, it looks like personal stress is affecting your professional judgment, your relationships with colleagues, and your ability to accept feedback and supervision. He opened a file folder on his desk and pulled out several sheets of paper. I've been documenting our conversations over the past few weeks, Michael. The pattern shows someone who's struggling to accept reduced responsibilities, questioning management decisions, and displaying concerning behavior that could create liability issues for the company. He was creating a fake HR file, manufacturing evidence of insubordination and instability that existed only in his imagination. But if I tried to dispute his characterizations, I'd be proving his point about my inability to accept feedback. I think we need to consider whether a leave of absence might be appropriate. Some time away from work pressure might help you address whatever personal issues are affecting your performance. A leave of absence would be career suicide. I'd return to find my projects reassigned, my clients transferred, and my position eliminated due to restructuring. It was a gentle way of firing someone without having to justify the termination. I don't need a leave of absence, I said firmly. That's exactly the kind of poor judgment I'm concerned about. You're not in a position to accurately assess your own mental state or professional capabilities. The pressure was relentless, designed to make me question my own perceptions and accept whatever fate Richard decided for me. But instead of feeling defeated, I felt energized by the knowledge that his campaign against me was about to backfire spectacularly. I'll take some time to consider your suggestions, I said. Good. I think that's wise. In the meantime, I'm going to have Jennifer take over your remaining Morrison responsibilities. We need to ensure continuity while you're getting your situations sorted out. As I walked back to my now meaningless workstation, I could feel the eyes of my colleagues following me. Word would spread quickly that I had been stripped of my last remaining project and was being pressured to take a leave of absence. My professional reputation was being destroyed in real time. That evening, Amanda was practically glowing with anticipation when I arrived home. She'd prepared my favorite meal again, opened expensive wine, and was wearing the kind of dress she usually reserved for special occasions. "How is your day, honey?" she asked with false concern. "Richard thinks I should take a leave of absence," I said, watching her reaction carefully. "Oh, Michael, I'm so sorry, but maybe that's not such a bad idea. You've been under so much stress lately, and some time off might help you get your perspective back." My perspective on what? On life? On work? On what really matters? Sometimes when we're struggling professionally, it helps to step back and reassess our priorities.
She was positioning my forced leave as a healthy choice rather than a career-ending humiliation, just as she had done with every other aspect of Richard's campaign against me. Richard mentioned that you've been talking to him about my stability. Amanda's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Michael, Richard is concerned about you. We both are. When someone you care about is showing signs of stress and paranoia, it's natural to discuss how to help them. So you've been having multiple conversations with my boss about my mental health. I've been talking to Richard about you because he wants to find ways to support you through this difficult period. He's been incredibly understanding about your performance issues. The gaslighting was masterful. Amanda was reframing her betrayal as concern, her affair as professional consultation, and Richard's abuse as supportive management. But as I listened to her lies, I realized something important. She was getting sloppy. The stress of maintaining her deception while planning her new life was making her overconfident, careless about covering her tracks. "That's very thoughtful of both of you," I said. "It's nice to know I have such caring people in my life." Amanda smiled, completely missing the sarcasm.
Wednesday morning brought the final test of my acting abilities. Richard had scheduled what he called a career development meeting for 9 a.m., a euphemistic title for what would obviously be my termination, or forced resignation. I walked into his office knowing it would likely be my last day as a Hartwell Industries employee, at least in my current capacity. Richard was sitting behind his desk with a smug satisfaction that he didn't bother to hide. Next to him sat Sarah from HR, looking uncomfortable and carrying a manila folder that probably contained my severance paperwork. "Michael, thank you for coming in," Richard said, gesturing for me to sit across from his desk. "I think you know why we're here." "I assume this is about the leave of absence we discussed yesterday?" "Actually, it's about something more permanent." Richard opened the folder in front of him and pulled out several sheets of paper. "After careful consideration of your recent performance issues and behavioral concerns, we've decided that your position here is no longer sustainable." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She'd known me for 5 years and had never seen any evidence of the performance problems Richard was describing. "We're prepared to offer you a generous severance package, provided you're willing to sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and waive any potential claims against the company." The severance agreement was designed to silence me permanently. If I signed it, I couldn't discuss my termination, couldn't file complaints with regulatory agencies, and couldn't pursue legal action for wrongful termination or hostile work environment. "What if I don't sign?" Richard's smile was predatory. "Then you'll be terminated for cause, which means no severance, no positive references, and a very difficult time finding comparable employment in this industry." The threat was clear. Take the money and disappear quietly, or be destroyed professionally and financially. "Can I have some time to review this?" I asked. "Of course," Richard said magnanimously. "Take the rest of the day, but I'll need your decision by tomorrow morning." As I walked back to my desk to collect my personal belongings, I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me. Word had already spread that I was being terminated, and the mixture of sympathy and relief on their faces told me everything I needed to know about how Richard had been positioning my performance issues. That evening, Amanda was waiting for me at home with champagne and an expression of barely contained excitement. "I heard about your meeting with Richard," she said, pouring 2 glasses of Dom Perignon. "I'm so sorry, honey, but maybe this is actually a blessing in disguise." "How is losing my job a blessing?" Amanda sat down beside me on our couch, her hand resting on my knee, in a gesture that probably once felt comforting, but now felt manipulative. Michael, you've been so unhappy at work lately. The stress has been affecting your health, your mood, your whole outlook on life. Maybe this is the universe telling you it's time for a fresh start.
A fresh start doing what? The severance package might last us 6 months if we're careful.
Amanda's smile became more confident. Actually, that's something I wanted to talk to you about. I got some wonderful news today. She paused dramatically, clearly savoring the moment. Richard offered me the head of creative strategy at Hartwell. 6-figure salary, full benefits, company car. I'd be starting Monday. The timing was perfect. My termination would be effective Thursday, and Amanda's promotion would begin the following Monday. They'd orchestrated a complete power transfer where I lost everything and she gained everything, all within a single weekend. Congratulations, I managed to say. That's quite a coincidence. It's not coincidence, it's opportunity. Richard has been impressed with my work on their marketing materials, and he thinks I could really help modernize their creative approach. The lies were flowing so smoothly that I almost admired her performance. Amanda was presenting her promotion as a legitimate business opportunity rather than payment for sexual services, and she seemed to genuinely believe her own fiction. So, you'll be working for Richard, my former boss, who just fired me. Amanda's expression flickered with something that might have been guilt, but it passed quickly. Michael, I know the timing is awkward, but we can't let your employment situation affect my career opportunities. This job could secure our financial future. Our future? Yes, our future. With my new salary, you won't need to rush into another position. You could take some time to figure out what you really want to do. Maybe go back to school or start that consulting business you used to talk about. Amanda was positioning herself as the supportive wife who would financially carry our marriage while I recovered from my professional setback. But her plan was transparent. Establish herself as the primary breadwinner so she could divorce me from a position of strength, claiming she'd outgrown her unsuccessful husband. That's very generous of you, I said. But what if working for Richard creates complications in our marriage? Her laugh was too bright, too quick. What kind of complications? Richard is a professional, and so am I. The fact that he had to make difficult decisions about your employment won't affect my ability to work with him. Even if people think it's strange that he fired me and hired you in the same week? Michael, you're being paranoid again. Richard made business decisions based on performance and qualifications. If people want to create gossip or drama, that's their choice, but it won't affect how I do my job. I studied my wife as she lied to my face with practiced ease, and realized that she had become a complete stranger to me. The woman I'd married 7 years ago would never have carried on an affair, accepted gifts from her lover, or celebrated her husband's professional destruction. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who could smile while stabbing me in the back and convince herself that her cruelty was actually kindness. Amanda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Her body tensed slightly, but her expression remained composed. Of course, honey. What is it? Are you having an affair with Richard? The question hung in the air between us like a live grenade. Amanda's face went through a series of micro-expressions: panic, calculation, indignation, hurt, before settling on wounded innocence. Michael, how can you ask me that? How can you even think such a thing? Because he fires me on Wednesday and offers you a 6-figure job on the same day.
Because you've been defending him constantly while he's been destroying my career. Because I can smell his cologne on your clothes when you come home from your meetings." Amanda stood up abruptly, her face flushed with what appeared to be genuine anger. "I can't believe you're accusing me of having an affair with the man who just ruined your career. Do you really think I'm that cruel? That calculating? I think you're capable of things I never imagined." "I think you are capable of things I never imagined." Amanda stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression, a hardening, a calculation, a decision being made. "You know what, Michael? You're right. I am capable of things you never imagined." She walked to her purse and pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found Richard's number. She hit dial and put the phone on speaker. "Richard, it's Amanda. I'm here with Michael, and he's making some very serious accusations about our relationship. Yes, he thinks we're having an affair. I know, it's ridiculous. Actually, could you come over? I think we need to address this directly." She hung up and looked at me with a mixture of defiance and satisfaction. Richard is coming over to set the straight record. Maybe hearing from him directly will help you realize how paranoid and destructive your thinking has become. I sat on our couch, watching my wife invite her lover to our home to gaslight me about their affair, and felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it, the final test, the last humiliation they thought they could inflict on me before completing their plan. They had no idea that in less than 24 hours, both of their worlds would collapse completely. Richard arrived 15 minutes later, letting himself into our house with a familiarity that spoke of frequent visits. He looked relaxed, confident, completely at ease as he settled into our living room to participate.
Thursday morning arrived with the precision of a military operation. At exactly 8 a.m., Linda Martinez walked into the offices of Hartwell Industries, carrying a briefcase full of evidence that would destroy Richard's career and expose Amanda's fraud. She wasn't alone. Behind her walked Detective Sarah Chen from the White Collar Crime Division and Margaret Foster, a corporate attorney representing the board of directors. I watched from the coffee shop across the street as they entered the building, knowing that Linda was about to deliver the opening salvo in our coordinated attack. By 8:15, they were in the conference room with 3 board members, laying out months of evidence showing how their CEO had systematically abused his position. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Package delivered. Board is reviewing everything now. Stand by." At 8:30, I received another message. "Holy shit, they're furious. Emergency board meeting called for 10 a.m. Police are reviewing criminal charges. This is working perfectly." I sat in the coffee shop, drinking espresso and watching the Hartwell building like I was observing a controlled demolition of my former life. Everything I'd built over 5 years was inside that building, but so were the 2 people who tried to destroy me. In a few hours, only one side would be left standing. At 9:15, I saw Amanda's Honda Civic pull into the parking garage. She was arriving early for what she thought would be her first day as head of creative strategy. Instead, she was walking into a corporate investigation that would end with criminal charges and public humiliation. My phone rang. "Linda, Michael, you need to get over here. The board wants to meet with you before they confront Richard." I walked across the street and took the elevator to the executive conference room on the 20th floor, a place I'd never been invited to during my 5 years with the company. Margaret Foster greeted me with a handshake and an expression of profound apology. "Mr. Thompson, on behalf of Hartwell Industries, I want to express our sincere regret for what you've endured. The evidence you've provided shows a pattern of abuse, fraud, and harassment that is completely unacceptable."
The 3 board members, all successful business people in their 60s, looked like they'd been personally violated by Richard's betrayal. Corporate executives don't like surprises, and discovering that their CEO was a predator who'd been stealing company funds was the worst kind of surprise imaginable. "We need to understand the full scope of what happened," said James Morrison, the board chairman. "How long has this been going on, and how much money are we talking about?" Linda opened her briefcase and began laying out financial documents, photographs, and email printouts across the massive conference table. "Based on our investigation, Richard Castellano has been using corporate funds to finance personal affairs for at least 2 years. The total fraudulent charges exceed $200,000, including hotels, restaurants, jewelry, vacations, and other personal expenses." The board members studied the evidence with the focused intensity of people calculating massive legal liability. "Furthermore," Linda continued, "Mr. Castellano created a fake executive position for Amanda Thompson, Mr. Michael Thompson's wife, as payment for sexual services. The position has no legitimate business purpose and represents a $140,000 annual expense for a non-existent role." "Jesus Christ," muttered Patricia Webb, the board's finance specialist. "Our insurance carrier is going to have a heart attack when they see this." Detective Chen leaned forward. "From a criminal perspective, we're looking at embezzlement, fraud, abuse of authority, and potentially sexual harassment if we can prove that other female employees were coerced or pressured into relationships." "They weren't coerced," I said quietly. "Richard is a serial predator. He targets married women, promises them career advancement, and uses company resources to maintain multiple relationships simultaneously." Linda pulled out additional files. "We've identified at least 4 other women over the past 3 years who received suspicious promotions, salary increases, or consulting contracts after beginning personal relationships with Mr. Castellano." The scope of Richard's predatory behavior was even worse than I had imagined. He'd been treating Hartwell Industries like his personal dating service, using shareholder money to fund a systematic campaign of workplace sexual exploitation. "Where's he now?" Morrison asked. "In his office," Linda replied. "He has no idea that we've discovered any of this. He's expecting to terminate Mr. Thompson this morning and officially announce Ms. Thompson's promotion." Morrison's smile was grim. "Well, he's going to get some surprises of his own." At 10 a.m. sharp, Richard was escorted to the conference room by building security. He walked in expecting to participate in some routine board business and instead found himself facing a table of evidence documenting his crimes. His confident smile faltered when he saw me sitting at the conference table, but he quickly composed himself and tried to take control of the situation. "Gentlemen, I wasn't expecting to see Michael here. I hope he hasn't been wasting your time with more paranoid accusations about imaginary problems." Morrison gestured for Richard to sit down. "Actually, Richard, we've been reviewing some very real problems. Problems with your expense accounts, your hiring practices, and your use of corporate resources for personal activities." Richard's face went pale as Morrison began pulling out documents, hotel receipts, credit card statements, emails, photographs. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. "This appears to be a receipt for a weekend at the Four Seasons, billed to the company as client entertainment. But our investigation shows you were there with Amanda Thompson, not any client." Richard tried to maintain his composure, but sweat was beginning to form on his forehead. "There may be some confusion about the categorization of those expenses," he said carefully. "Amanda has been providing valuable consulting services, and some of our discussions took place in informal settings." "Informal settings like hotel rooms that you shared, consulting services that included sexual intercourse, business discussions that were documented in text messages where you called her body intoxicating and planned to make her scream your name." The crude details hit Richard like physical blows. He was realizing that we hadn't just discovered his affair, We documented every sordid detail of their relationship with Amanda. Furthermore, Detective Chen added, our investigation has uncovered evidence of systematic fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of authority spanning multiple years and involving several female employees. Richard's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. This is a setup. Michael is a disgruntled employee who's been making false accusations because he couldn't handle his performance issues. Amanda and I have a professional relationship that he's mischaracterizing because of his mental instability. Morrison pulled out the text message transcripts and began reading them aloud. Amanda, your husband is remarkably naive. I've been systematically undermining his credibility for weeks, and he still thinks this is about work performance rather than making room for us to be together. I can't wait until I can divorce him and move in with you. Living with someone so weak and unsuccessful is exhausting. You make me feel like the woman I'm supposed to be. Morrison looked up from the transcripts. These don't sound like professional communications, Richard. But Richard was no longer listening. He was staring at the evidence spread across the table, realizing that his carefully planned destruction of my marriage and career had been documented in excruciating detail. How? He whispered. How did we find out? I asked. Because you're not as smart as you think you are. You're just another mediocre predator who thought he could abuse his power without consequences. Morrison stood up, his expression of disgusted finality. Richard Castellano, you are terminated immediately for cause. Security will escort you from the building. You have 15 minutes to collect your personal belongings under supervision. All corporate accounts, credit cards, and access privileges are revoked as of this moment. Detective Chen stepped forward. Mr. Castellano, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of authority. You have the right to remain silent. As Richard was read his rights and handcuffed, I felt a surge of satisfaction unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The man who had systematically destroyed my career while fucking my wife was being arrested in the same conference room where he'd planned my termination just 12 hours earlier. But the show wasn't over yet. Where is Amanda Thompson? Morrison asked. Linda checked her phone. She should be arriving at the office right about now for her first day as head of creative strategy. Security is bringing her up, Morrison said with grim satisfaction. I think it's time she learned that her promotion has been rescinded. As Richard was led away in handcuffs, I remained in the conference room to watch the second act of our corporate drama. Amanda was about to discover that her carefully planned professional upgrade had turned into a criminal investigation that would destroy her life just as thoroughly as she'd tried to destroy mine. The elevator doors opened, and Amanda walked into the conference room wearing her best professional attire, carrying a briefcase, and glowing with excitement.
The sight of Richard being led away in handcuffs should have been the climax of our corporate showdown, but I'd underestimated just how desperate and vindictive a cornered predator could become. Within hours of his arrest, Richard's lawyer had crafted a counterattack designed to destroy my credibility and frame me as the real villain in the entire affair. The call came from Linda at 2 p.m., just as I was beginning to process the magnitude of our morning victory. Michael, we have a problem. Richard's attorney just filed a police report claiming that you've been embezzling company funds and that the evidence we presented this morning was fabricated to cover your own crimes. I felt the ground shift beneath me. What are you talking about? Richard is claiming that you had access to his corporate credit cards, that you made the fraudulent charges yourself, and that your affair accusations are a smokescreen to hide your own theft from the company. The audacity was breathtaking. Richard was trying to flip the entire narrative, positioning himself as the victim of an elaborate frame-up orchestrated by a disgruntled employee with criminal intentions. How is that even possible? We have photographs of him with Amanda, hotel security footage, text messages.
He's not denying the affair, Linda interrupted. He's claiming that Amanda seduced him as part of your scheme to compromise him professionally. According to his story, you discovered his weakness for married women and used your wife to entrap him while you stole company money. I had to sit down as the implications hit me. Richard was painting Amanda and me as co-conspirators in an elaborate blackmail scheme, suggesting that our entire marriage was a long-term con designed to infiltrate his company and steal corporate funds. That's insane. No one will believe that. Michael, Richard didn't become CEO by being stupid. He's crafting a narrative that explains all the evidence while positioning him as the victim. Think about it from an outsider's perspective. Why would a successful CEO risk everything for an affair with a subordinate's wife unless he was being manipulated? Linda was right. Richard's counterattack was psychologically sophisticated, playing on people's tendency to see powerful men as victims of scheming women rather than as predators who abused their authority. What about the other women, the pattern of affairs and fraudulent expenses going back years? He's claiming those were all part of your long-term plan to destroy him. According to his lawyer, you've been systematically gathering evidence of his personal weaknesses while embezzling company funds, and the affair with Amanda was just the final phase of your scheme. The brilliance of Richard's defense was its psychological credibility. It was easier for people to believe that a disgruntled employee had crafted an elaborate revenge plot than to accept that a respected CEO was a serial predator who'd been stealing company money for years. Have the police bought this story? They're taking it seriously enough to investigate. Detective Chen is reviewing all our evidence again, looking for any signs that it might have been fabricated or manipulated. I felt the victory of the morning slipping away. Richard was using his final play, the desperate gambit of a man with nothing left to lose who was determined to take his enemies down with him. What's our next move? We prove that Richard's story is impossible. The timeline doesn't work, the financial evidence is too extensive, and there are too many independent witnesses, but we need to move fast before his narrative gains momentum. That afternoon, Linda and I worked frantically to document every aspect of our investigation, proving that the evidence couldn't have been fabricated or manipulated by someone in my position. We pulled security footage from multiple hotels, obtained independent verification of credit card transactions, and gathered testimony from witnesses who had seen Richard and Amanda together. But Richard's counterattack was already having an effect. By evening, I received a call from Detective Chen asking me to come to the police station for questioning about irregularities in the embezzlement case. Mr. Thompson, we need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about your role in this investigation, Detective Chen said, as I sat in a sterile interview room that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. What kind of concerns? Mr. Castellano's attorney has provided evidence suggesting that you had unauthorized access to corporate financial systems and may have used that access to create fraudulent transactions that you later blamed on your boss. She pulled out a file folder and spread several documents across the table between us. These are system logs showing that someone with your user credentials accessed the expense database multiple times over the past month, often outside normal business hours. My stomach dropped. Of course I'd accessed the expense database. It was part of my job responsibilities, and I'd been researching Richard's fraudulent charges as part of our investigation. I accessed those systems as part of my normal work duties and to gather evidence of Richard's embezzlement, I explained. But these logs show you accessing records that weren't related to your assigned projects. Why would you need to review Mr. Castellano's personal expense reports unless you were planning to manipulate them? The trap was elegant. Richard had used my legitimate investigation activities as evidence that I was the one committing fraud. My efforts to document his crimes were being reframed as proof that I was the real criminal. Detective, I gathered evidence of systematic embezzlement and abuse of authority. Everything I accessed was already there. I didn't create or modify anything. That's what someone would say if they were trying to cover their tracks, she replied. Mr. Castellano's attorney has also provided evidence that your wife may have been cooperating with your scheme to entrap him.
She pulled out more documents, printouts of Amanda's text messages and emails that had been carefully edited to remove context and make her appear to be a willing participant in a blackmail plot rather than Richard's lover. "She's discussing our marriage problems with my boss unless they had a personal relationship," I said. "According to Mr. Castellano, your wife approached him expressing concerns about your behavior and asking for guidance on how to handle your erratic behavior. He claims he was trying to be supportive of an employee's family situation when you seduced him into a compromising relationship to use against him." The psychological sophistication of Richard's defense was stunning. He was acknowledging the affair while claiming he was the victim of seduction and manipulation. Amanda's genuine attraction to him was being reframed as calculated deception designed to destroy his reputation. "This is ridiculous," I said. "Check the hotel security footage, look at the credit card transactions, talk to the other women Richard has been involved with. The evidence doesn't support his story." "We're reviewing all of that," Detective Chen replied. "But Mr. Castellano's attorney has raised legitimate questions about the chain of custody for that evidence and whether it might have been fabricated or manipulated by someone with your technical skills." I spent 2 hours at the police station answering questions designed to probe whether I could have orchestrated the elaborate frame-up that Richard was describing. By the time I left, I wasn't sure whether Detective Chen viewed me as a victim seeking justice or a criminal trying to cover her tracks. When I arrived at Linda's office that evening, she was working frantically to counter Richard's narrative before it gained more traction. "The good news is that his story has holes," she reported. "The timeline doesn't work, some of the fraudulent transactions predate your access to those systems by months, and the other women Richard was involved with are starting to come forward with their own stories of how he manipulated them." "What about Amanda? Has she been arrested?" Linda's expression was grim. "She's been questioned, but not arrested. And here's where things get complicated. She's supporting Richard's version of events." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "What do you mean?" "She's claiming that you forced her to seduce Richard as part of your revenge scheme. She says you threatened to divorce her and leave her with nothing unless she helped you destroy his reputation." The ultimate betrayal was complete. My wife was not only abandoning me for her lover, she was actively participating in his attempt to frame me for crimes he committed. So now I'm facing potential criminal charges while Richard and Amanda present themselves as victims of my manipulation. That's what they're hoping for, but they've made one crucial mistake. Which is? Linda smiled for the first time all day. "They're lying about people they think they can control, but they can't control everyone who knows the truth. And tomorrow, we're going to prove it."
The emergency board meeting convened at 8 a.m. sharp in Hartwell Industries' executive conference room. But this time the atmosphere was different. Gone was the confident professionalism of our previous gathering, replaced by the tension of a company fighting for its survival against criminal liability and public scandal. Word of Richard's arrest had leaked to the press overnight, and the local business journal was already running headlines about CEO charged with embezzlement in affair scandal. The board members looked like people who discovered that their house was built on a foundation of lies and corruption. But Richard wasn't given up without a fight. Despite being released on bail and facing criminal charges, he'd convinced the board to hear his side of the story before making any permanent decisions about his employment status. "Gentlemen," Richard began, as he took his seat at the head of the conference table, "I want to address the serious allegations that have been made against me and provide you with the complete picture of what's really happened here." He was immaculately dressed and composed, every inch the successful executive who'd built Hartwell Industries into a major player in the consulting world. If I hadn't seen the evidence myself, his confident demeanor might have been convincing. "Over the past year, I've been the target of an elaborate revenge scheme orchestrated by a disgruntled employee who was facing termination for performance issues. Michael Thompson, with the assistance of his wife, has systematically manipulated evidence to make it appear that I was embezzling company funds while conducting an inappropriate relationship with Mrs. Thompson. He pulled out his own folder of documents and began distributing them around the table. These computer logs show that Mr. Thompson accessed corporate financial systems dozens of times over the past month, always during off hours when his activities wouldn't be monitored. He had the technical knowledge and system access necessary to create fraudulent transactions and then blame them on me. Board Chairman Morrison studied the computer logs with obvious concern. Richard, these access records do show unusual activity from Michael's user account. How do you explain that? Because I was investigating your systematic theft of company funds. I accessed those systems to document the fraudulent charges you'd been making for months. Richard's smile was condescending. That's exactly what someone would say if they were trying to cover their tracks. Michael knew he was about to be terminated, so he hatched a desperate plan to destroy my reputation before I could fire him. Linda Martinez stood up from her seat at the far end of the table. If I may, I'd like to address some factual problems with Mr. Castellano's timeline. She pulled out her own set of documents and spread them across the table. According to Mr. Castellano, Michael began his alleged revenge scheme within the past month, but our investigation has documented fraudulent expenses dating back over 2 years, long before Michael had any performance issues or reason to seek revenge. She pointed to a series of credit card statements. These charges for hotels, restaurants, and luxury items predate Michael's supposed motivation for revenge by 18 months. Unless Mr. Castellano is claiming that Michael has been planning this scheme for years, his explanation doesn't account for the full scope of the financial evidence. Richard's composure flickered slightly. Those earlier charges may have been legitimate business expenses that are being mischaracterized. Business expenses for couples massages? Romantic dinners at restaurants with no client present? Hotel suites booked for personal getaways with women who don't work for Hartwell Industries? She pulled out hotel security footage stills showing Richard with various women over the past 2 years. Our investigation has identified 5 different women who received career benefits after beginning personal relationships with Mr. Castellano. Are we to believe that Michael somehow orchestrated affairs between his boss and multiple women as part of an elaborate revenge plot? The evidence was overwhelming, and Richard's story was beginning to crumble under the weight of facts that couldn't be explained by his conspiracy theory. But Richard wasn't finished. He played his final card with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Patricia Webb," he said, looking directly at the board's finance specialist. "I need to remind everyone in this room that Michael Thompson has been having significant personal and financial difficulties over the past year. His marriage has been troubled, his work performance has declined, and he's been displaying signs of mental instability." He pulled out Amanda's emails and text messages, carefully edited to remove context. "These communications from Mrs. Thompson to me express serious concerns about her husband's deteriorating mental state. She was worried about his ability to make rational decisions and his increasing paranoia about imaginary conspiracies." He distributed the edited messages around the table. "Mrs. Thompson approached me seeking advice on how to help her troubled husband. She was concerned that his work stress was affecting his judgment and his ability to maintain professional relationships." Patricia Webb studied Amanda's messages with obvious concern. "These do suggest that Mrs. Thompson was worried about her husband's stability. Why would she share these concerns with you unless she was genuinely seeking help?" "Because," Linda interjected, "these messages have been taken out of context to hide the fact that Mrs. Thompson was having an affair with Mr. Castellano and was discussing her husband's growing suspicions about their relationship." She pulled out the full text message threads showing the context that Richard had carefully removed. When you read the full conversations, it becomes clear that Mrs. Thompson wasn't seeking advice about her troubled husband. She was coordinating with her lover about how to manage her husband's discovery of their affair. Linda began reading from the full message thread. "Richard, Michael is starting to ask questions about where I've been spending my time. I told him I was working on freelance projects, but I don't think he believes me. What should we do?" "Don't worry about Michael. I'm planning to transition him to reduced responsibilities anyway, which will give us more flexibility to be together. If he becomes too suspicious, we can always suggest that work stress is affecting his judgment." The full context of the messages revealed Richard and Amanda's affair and their conspiracy to manipulate me, not Amanda's concerns about my mental health. Morrison looked up from the full message threads with disgust. "Richard, these communications show you and Mrs. Thompson planning to undermine her husband's career to facilitate your affair. This isn't evidence that Michael was unstable. This is evidence that you were manipulating his employment situation for personal reasons." The room fell silent as the board members processed the full picture of Richard's systematic abuse of authority, embezzlement of corporate funds, and conspiracy to destroy my career. Detective Chen, who had been observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. "Based on our investigation over the past 48 hours, we've determined that Mr. Thompson's allegations are supported by overwhelming evidence, while Mr. Castellano's claims of being framed are contradicted by the timeline and scope of the financial evidence." She looked directly at Richard with professional disgust. "Mr. Castellano, you are facing additional charges of filing a false police report and attempting to obstruct justice through your fraudulent claims against Mr. Thompson." Richard's face went white as he realized his desperate counterattack had only added to his legal problems. Morrison stood up, his expression of finality and disgust. "Richard Castellano, you are terminated immediately for cause. All benefits, severance, and compensation are forfeited. Hartwell Industries will be pursuing civil litigation to recover the funds you embezzled, and we will be cooperating fully with law enforcement in their criminal investigation." He turned to me with an expression of genuine remorse. "Michael, on behalf of the board in this company, I want to apologize for what you've endured. Your employment termination is rescinded, and we'd like to discuss a significant promotion and compensation package to address the hostile work environment you experienced." As Richard was escorted from the building for the second time in 2 days, this time permanently, I felt a sense of vindication that went beyond personal satisfaction. Justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty, it was about restoring the truth and ensuring that predators couldn't use their power to destroy innocent people. But there was still one more piece of business to address. "What about Amanda Thompson's employment offer?" Morrison asked. Linda smiled grimly. "I believe Mrs. Thompson is about to discover that her career upgrade has been permanently canceled." Richard's arrest made front-page news in the business section, but his complete professional destruction was a slower, more methodical process that unfolded over the following weeks as the full scope of his crimes became public knowledge. Tech CEO charged with embezzlement in affair scandal was just the beginning. As more details emerged about Richard's systematic abuse of corporate resources and serial predatory behavior, the headlines grew more damning. "Executive accused of running company as personal dating service," and "shareholders file lawsuit over CEO's fraud scheme." The board of directors at Hartwell Industries moved quickly to distance themselves from Richard's crimes, but the damage to the company's reputation was immediate and severe. 3 major clients canceled contracts worth over $15 million, citing concerns about working with an organization that had enabled such systematic fraud and misconduct. "We can't risk our reputation by associating with a company whose CEO is stealing money to finance affairs with subordinates' wives," explained the CFO of Morrison Industries, our largest former client. If their board didn't know what was happening, what other oversight failures might we discover? The loss of major clients triggered a cascade of financial problems for Hartwell Industries. Stock prices plummeted, credit lines were frozen, and employee morale collapsed as people wondered whether their jobs would survive the corporate scandal. But Richard's personal professional destruction went far beyond his termination from Hartwell Industries. Within days of his arrest, Richard was forced to resign from 3 nonprofit organizations, 2 professional associations, and a community development foundation. None of these organizations could afford to be associated with someone facing criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. Mr. Castellano's alleged actions are completely inconsistent with our organizational values, read a typical statement from the Children's Hospital Foundation, where Richard had been a major donor and board member. We cannot continue our association with someone who may have used stolen funds to support our cause. The revelation that Richard might have been making charitable donations with embezzled corporate funds triggered investigations by multiple nonprofit organizations and regulatory agencies. Every grant, every donation, every community contribution he'd made over the past 3 years became suspect. Richard's professional network, the connections he'd spent decades building in the business community, evaporated overnight. Former colleagues, clients, and industry contacts began publicly distancing themselves from his scandal. "I had no idea about Richard's personal conduct," said Thomas Henderson, CEO of our former flagship client. "If I had known he was the kind of man who would systematically steal from his company while destroying an employee's marriage, we never would have done business with Hartwell Industries." The professional damage extended beyond just business relationships. Richard had been scheduled to speak at 3 industry conferences over the next 6 months. All invitations were rescinded within hours of his arrest. A business magazine that had planned to feature him in an upcoming Entrepreneurs to Watch article pulled the story and ran an exposé about corporate fraud instead. Most devastatingly, the industry itself began treating Richard as a pariah, whose association could destroy careers and reputations. Nobody wants to be the person who hired Richard Castellano or did business with him after this scandal, explained Maria Santos, an executive recruiter who specialized in C-level placements. His name has become toxic in the business community. Companies are actively avoiding any connection to his reputation. The criminal charges added another layer of professional destruction. Richard was facing multiple felony counts for embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of authority, charges that would make him unemployable in any executive position even if he avoided prison time. Corporate boards have zero tolerance for executives with criminal records, explained Dr. Patricia Chen, a business ethics professor who specialized in corporate governance. Richard Castellano will never hold another senior position in any legitimate company. His career is effectively over. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of Richard's professional downfall was how quickly his business relationships revealed their true nature. The investors, who had praised Richard's leadership when Hartwell Industries was profitable, immediately began distancing themselves when his crimes became public. Partners who had competed to work with him suddenly claimed they'd always had concerns about his character and business practices. "We were always uncomfortable with Richard's aggressive management style," said one former business partner, completely rewriting history now that Richard's reputation was destroyed. "There were red flags that we probably should have addressed earlier." The revisionist history was remarkable to observe. Richard had been universally praised as a brilliant executive and successful entrepreneur just weeks earlier. Now, those same people were claiming they'd always known something was wrong with his character and leadership approach. Within a month of his arrest, Richard had lost every professional connection, every board position, every speaking engagement, and every business opportunity he'd spent 20 years building. The man who had commanded respect and admiration in the business community was now a cautionary tale about how quickly success could turn to scandal. The financial implications were equally devastating. Richard's legal defense was costing him thousands of dollars per week, draining the assets he'd accumulated during his successful career. The civil lawsuit filed by Hartwell Industries was seeking to recover not just the $200,000 in fraudulent expenses, but also punitive damages and legal fees that could exceed $1 million. His personal assets, the luxury car, the expensive house, the investment portfolio, were all at risk as civil lawsuits and criminal restitution orders began working their way through the court system. Richard went from being worth several million dollars to facing potential bankruptcy within a matter of weeks, explained Patricia Webb, the forensic accountant hired to trace his stolen assets. The legal fees alone could consume most of his net worth even before any judgment or restitution orders. 6 months after his arrest, Richard was working as a consultant for small businesses that didn't know about his criminal charges, earning a fraction of his former salary while awaiting trial on multiple felony counts. The man who had been CEO of a major consulting firm, who had commanded 6-figure speaking fees and served on prestigious boards, was reduced to helping mom-and-pop businesses with their marketing strategies for $50 an hour. His professional fall was so complete, so devastating, that it became a case study in business schools about how personal misconduct could destroy decades of career success in a matter of days. The Castellano case demonstrates that executive reputation is both extremely valuable and extremely fragile, wrote Professor James Morrison in a Harvard Business Review article about corporate ethics. Richard Castellano lost everything he'd spent 20 years building because he thought his position made him immune to consequences. But Richard's professional destruction was only half of his punishment. His personal life was about to collapse just as completely as his career had.
While I was watching Richard's final defeat in the Hartwell boardroom, Amanda was sitting in a police station conference room 3 miles away, facing Detective Sarah Chen and a stack of evidence that would destroy her life just as completely as she tried to destroy mine. Linda had arranged for Amanda's questioning to happen simultaneously with Richard's board meeting, ensuring that neither of them could coordinate their stories or prepare for what was coming. "Mrs. Thompson," Detective Chen began, "we need to discuss your relationship with Richard Castellano and your involvement in what appears to be a systematic campaign to defraud Hartwell Industries and destroy your husband's career." Amanda was dressed in the same professional attire she'd worn to her supposed first day as head of creative strategy, but her composed exterior was already beginning to crack as she realized the magnitude of the evidence against her. "I don't know what you're talking about," Amanda said, but her voice lacked the confidence she'd shown during months of lying to me. "Richard offered me a legitimate job based on my qualifications." Detective Chen opened her file and began laying out photographs across the table. Images of Amanda and Richard embracing, kissing, and acting like lovers in dozens of locations over the past 8 months. "Mrs. Thompson, we have documented evidence of your affair with Mr. Castellano, including hotel stays paid for with corporate funds, romantic dinners billed as business expenses, and text messages where you discuss your plans to divorce your husband and move in with your lover." Amanda's face went pale as she stared at the photographic evidence of her betrayal. "Furthermore, we have evidence that you actively participated in Mr. Castellano's plan to destroy your husband's career through false performance evaluations, manufactured disciplinary issues, and systematic workplace harassment." She pulled out the email threads between Richard and HR, showing how Amanda's concerns about my mental health had been used to justify my professional humiliation. "You provided Mr. Castellano with personal information about your husband that he used to create a hostile environment and justify his termination. In legal terms, this constitutes conspiracy to commit fraud and potentially criminal harassment." Amanda finally spoke, but her voice was barely above a whisper. "I never meant for things to go this far. I fell in love with Richard. He said we could have a future together if we handled the situation carefully." "By handling the situation carefully, you mean destroying your husband's reputation and career, while accepting a high-paying position that was created specifically to reward you for sexual services?" "It wasn't like that," Amanda protested. "Richard really did think I would be good at the creative strategy role. My qualifications..." Mrs. Thompson, the position of head of creative strategy didn't exist until Richard decided to create it specifically for you. The job description was written after he decided to hire you, not before. This wasn't a legitimate business decision, it was payment for sexual services and compensation for helping him destroy your husband. Detective Chen pulled out Amanda's bank records, showing the separate savings account she'd been funding with money transferred from our joint checking account. We also have evidence that you've been systematically removing money from your joint marital accounts and hiding it in a personal savings account. Combined with your affair and the fraudulent job offer, this suggests a calculated plan to financially prepare for divorcing your husband while leaving him with nothing. Amanda was crying now, the careful composure she'd maintained for months finally cracking under the weight of evidence showing her systematic betrayal and fraud. "I want to speak to a lawyer," she said finally. "That's your right," Detective Chen replied. "But before you do, I want you to understand the full scope of what you're facing. Mr. Castellano has been arrested and is claiming that you seduced him as part of your husband's revenge scheme. He's trying to portray you as a co-conspirator who helped your husband frame him for embezzlement." Amanda's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "That's not true. Richard pursued me. He promised me we'd have a future together. I would never—" "But that's exactly what Mr. Castellano was claiming happened. According to his lawyer, you're both criminals who conspired to destroy an innocent CEO through false accusations and fabricated evidence." The realization hit Amanda like a physical blow. Richard was abandoning her, throwing her under the bus to save himself from the consequences of their joint crimes. "He's lying," Amanda whispered. "I have text messages, emails, evidence that he initiated everything. I never conspired with Michael to hurt Richard. I was planning to leave Michael for Richard." "Then you'll need to provide that evidence to prove your innocence, because right now you're facing charges for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement of marital assets, and participating in a criminal harassment campaign against your husband." As Amanda was processed through the criminal justice system, word of her arrest spread through her professional and personal networks with devastating speed. Amanda had built her freelance graphic design business on referrals from friends, family members, and social connections who trusted her personal character. Learning that she'd been arrested for fraud, adultery, and conspiracy destroyed that trust, instantly and completely. Her biggest client, a local nonprofit organization, terminated her contract within hours of her arrest being reported in the Business Journal. "We can't have someone facing criminal charges representing our organization," the executive director explained, in a terse email that was copied to Amanda's other professional contacts. The domino effect was swift and merciless. Within 48 hours, Amanda lost every freelance client she'd spent years cultivating. Wedding photographers, small businesses, startup companies, all of them distanced themselves from someone whose personal scandal had made them a liability. But the professional consequences were nothing compared to the social destruction that followed. Amanda's family reacted to news of her arrest with shame and fury that surprised even me. Her parents, who had always presented themselves as pillars of their small-town community, were horrified that their daughter's adultery and criminal charges were being discussed in newspapers and social media. "How could you do this to us?" her mother screamed during a phone call that half the neighborhood could hear. "Your father can't show his face at church anymore. People are asking if we raised you to be a criminal and a homewrecker." Amanda's sister called to inform her that she was no longer welcome at family gatherings, holiday celebrations, or her nephew's upcoming graduation. "The kids are asking questions about why Aunt Amanda was arrested," she explained coldly. "We can't have you around them anymore." Even Amanda's college friends, the women she'd maintained relationships with for over a decade, began distancing themselves as details of her affair and fraud became public. "I can't believe she was complaining to us about Michael not appreciating her while she was screwing her husband's boss," one former friend posted on Facebook. "We actually felt sorry for her and gave her advice on how to improve her marriage. I feel so stupid for believing her lies."
The social media pile-on was brutal and comprehensive. Photos of Amanda and Richard from their secret getaways were shared thousands of times, usually with captions mocking her choices and character. Someone created a fake LinkedIn profile listing her profession as homewrecker and corporate fraud specialist. Most devastatingly, the revelation of Amanda's crimes destroyed her credibility in every aspect of her life. Stories from her past, instances of lying, manipulation, and selfishness that people had previously overlooked or forgiven, as friends and family members recontextualized her entire character in light of her recent actions. We always knew she was self-centered, but we never imagined she was capable of something so cruel and calculated, her college roommate told a local reporter. Within a week of her arrest, Amanda had lost her career, her family relationships, her social circle, and her reputation. The woman who had planned to upgrade from a failed husband to a successful CEO found herself unemployed, socially isolated, and facing criminal charges that could result in prison time. The final humiliation came when Amanda tried to contact Richard from jail, hoping he would help pay for her legal defense or at least provide emotional support during the crisis. Richard's lawyer informed her attorney that his client had no interest in speaking with her and considered her a co-conspirator in the crimes he is accused of committing. Amanda was truly alone, abandoned by the lover she had betrayed her husband for, and facing the consequences of her choices without any support system. As I learned about the complete destruction of Amanda's life, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and pity. She had made deliberate choices to betray me, destroy my career, and steal my future. But watching her lose everything she'd worked for while facing criminal prosecution was more brutal than even I had anticipated. Justice, I realized, wasn't always as satisfying as I had expected it to be. Sometimes it was just necessary.
The Monday after Richard's final defeat, I walked into Hartwell Industries as the newly appointed Vice President of Client Services, a position that had been created specifically to replace Richard's responsibilities while ensuring the company could rebuild from the scandal he'd created. The promotion came with a 40% salary increase, a corner office on the 15th floor, and complete authority over the client relationships that Richard had nearly destroyed through his criminal behavior. But more importantly, it came with something I'd thought I'd lost forever: professional respect and recognition for my actual abilities, rather than my tolerance for humiliation. "Michael," said James Morrison, the board chairman, as he walked me to my new office, "I want you to understand that this promotion isn't just about filling Richard's role. It's about acknowledging that you were the real driving force behind many of our successful client relationships, and that Richard was taking credit for your work while systematically trying to destroy your career." The corner office was 3 times the size of my former cubicle, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and furnishings that reflected my new status within the company hierarchy. But the most satisfying element was the view directly into the conference room where Richard had been arrested, a daily reminder of how completely the power dynamic had shifted. My first major task was rebuilding the client relationships that had been damaged by the scandal surrounding Richard's arrest. Hartendale Industries, Henderson Corp., and other major clients needed reassurance that Hartwell was still capable of delivering excellent service despite the criminal behavior of its former CEO. Michael Thompson was the actual strategic mind behind most of our successful projects. Richard may have taken credit publicly, but Michael was doing the real work of managing client relationships and developing creative solutions. The client meetings were surprisingly positive. Several executives admitted that they'd always preferred working with me over Richard, and that they'd only tolerated Richard's arrogant management style because they valued my actual contributions to their projects. "Richard always made meetings about himself," explained Sarah Martinez, CFO at Morrison Industries. "You actually listen to our concerns and develop solutions that work for our business. We're more confident in Hartwell's future now that you're leading the client services division." Within 6 weeks, I had not only retained all of our major clients, but had also secured 3 new contracts worth over $8 million in total revenue. The business community's response was clear. They wanted to work with competent professionals who delivered results, not predatory executives who used their companies as personal dating services. The success of my client relationship rebuilding led to additional recognition within the company. The board of directors asked me to present a comprehensive analysis of how Richard's misconduct had affected business operations and what structural changes were needed to prevent similar problems in the future. Michael's recommendations for improving our corporate governance and employee protection policies are exactly what we need. Patricia Webb told the board after reviewing my 50-page report on organizational reform. He's demonstrated that surviving workplace harassment and fraud doesn't just make someone a victim. It can make them a better leader who understands how to prevent abuse of power. The report I submitted became the foundation for Hartwell's new ethics policies, including mandatory reporting procedures for workplace harassment, regular audits of executive expense accounts, and clear guidelines for preventing conflicts of interest in hiring and promotion decisions. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of my professional redemption was the response from my colleagues who had watched Richard's systematic campaign to destroy my career. We all knew something was wrong, Jennifer Martinez admitted during a team meeting. Richard's treatment of you was obviously personal rather than professional, but none of us knew how to address it without risking our own jobs. Several colleagues privately shared their own experiences with Richard's inappropriate behavior. Comments about their spouses, unwanted personal questions, and subtle intimidation tactics designed to maintain his dominance over the workplace culture. You standing up to Richard gave all of us permission to speak up about his behavior, explained David Kim, a senior analyst who had worked under Richard for 3 years. None of us realized how pervasive his abuse was until someone finally had the courage to document it and fight back. My experience surviving Richard's harassment campaign had given me unique insights into identifying and preventing workplace abuse. Within 6 months, I was invited to speak at 3 industry conferences about corporate ethics and employee protection, the same conferences that had rescinded Richard's speaking invitations after his arrest. Michael Thompson's presentation on identifying and addressing workplace predators should be required viewing for every corporate executive. His experience demonstrates that companies can not only survive leadership scandals, but can emerge stronger when they promote ethical employees who understand how to build healthy organizational cultures. The speaking engagements led to consulting opportunities with other companies that were dealing with their own ethical lapses and leadership problems. My expertise in rebuilding after corporate scandal became a valuable commodity in a business environment where executive misconduct was increasingly recognized as a serious threat to organizational success. Michael has lived through the worst-case scenario of workplace harassment and emerged as a stronger leader, explained Dr. Patricia Chen, the business ethics professor who had studied Richard's case. Companies want to learn from someone who has actually survived systematic workplace abuse and can provide practical guidance on preventing similar problems. A year after Richard's arrest, I was earning more money than I had ever imagined possible, leading a division of 25 employees and being recognized as an expert in corporate ethics and crisis management. The career that Richard had tried to destroy through systematic humiliation and manufactured performance issues had been rebuilt into something more successful and meaningful than my original trajectory. But the professional success was only part of my redemption. The personal transformation was equally significant. The experience of surviving betrayal, documenting systematic fraud, and fighting back against powerful people who thought they could destroy me with impunity had given me confidence and resilience that I'd never possessed before. I was no longer the naive employee who trusted his superiors and assumed that hard work would be rewarded fairly. "You're a completely different person than you were during Richard's harassment campaign," observed Linda Martinez during one of our periodic check-ins.
You've learned to recognize manipulation, document everything, and fight back effectively when people try to abuse their power over you. The skills I developed during my battle with Richard and Amanda, investigation techniques, evidence gathering, strategic planning, and psychological resilience, had made me an effective leader and a better judge of character. Michael's experience surviving workplace predators has made him exceptionally good at identifying problematic behavior before it escalates. He can spot the early warning signs of abuse and manipulation that other executives might miss because he's lived through the complete cycle of workplace harassment. 2 years after walking into Richard's office as a defeated employee facing termination, I was sitting in board meetings as an executive partner, helping to set company policy and strategic direction. The transformation was so complete that new employees who joined Hartwell Industries had no idea that I had once been the victim of systematic workplace abuse. But I never forgot the lessons I learned from Richard and Amanda's betrayal. Every day I used those insights to build a healthier workplace culture, protect vulnerable employees, and ensure that no one else would have to endure the systematic destruction that they had attempted to inflict on me. Justice, I had learned, wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about using your survival to protect other people and build something better from the wreckage of what had been destroyed.
2 years after the Christmas party that shattered my world, I was sitting in the executive dining room of Hartwell Industries, celebrating the company's most profitable quarter in its history. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was occupying the same seat where Richard used to hold court, commanding respect from subordinates who now looked to me for leadership and strategic direction. The transformation was complete and undeniable. I'd gone from being a humiliated employee facing termination to becoming the executive vice president of the entire consulting division, earning more than Richard had ever made while building a reputation for ethical leadership that attracted both top talent and premium clients. The Morrison Industries contract alone is worth more than our entire revenue from Richard's final year, reported Patricia Webb, who had transitioned from board oversight to serving as my chief financial officer. Our clients specifically request to work with leadership they can trust, and your reputation for integrity has become our strongest competitive advantage. The business success was gratifying, but the personal vindication was even more satisfying. Every day, I walked past the conference room where Amanda had caught Richard kissing, and instead of feeling pain, I felt pride in how completely I'd rebuilt my life from that moment of devastating betrayal. But the sweetest victory was observing how completely both Richard and Amanda had destroyed themselves through their arrogance and cruelty. Richard's criminal trial had ended 8 months earlier, with convictions on multiple felony counts, including embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of authority. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution, money he didn't have after his legal defense had consumed most of his assets. Richard Castellano represents everything wrong with executive leadership in modern corporations. His systematic abuse of power, his exploitation of employees' trust, and his complete lack of remorse for the lives he destroyed make him a danger to any organization foolish enough to employ him. Upon his release from prison, Richard would be a registered felon with no realistic prospects for employment in any legitimate business. The man who had once commanded million-dollar consulting contracts was facing a future of minimum wage jobs and permanent social stigma. But even more satisfying was Richard's complete social destruction. His wife had divorced him during the trial, taking half of his remaining assets and publicly denouncing his character in court proceedings that were covered extensively by local media. I had no idea I was married to a predator who was systematically destroying other people's lives for his own gratification, she testified. The Richard Castellano I thought I knew was a complete fiction designed to hide his true nature as a manipulative criminal. His adult children had cut off all contact, his former business associates refused to acknowledge they'd ever known him, and his country club membership had been revoked for conduct incompatible with our community standards.
Richard had become a cautionary tale in business schools and corporate ethics seminars, the executive whose personal misconduct destroyed not only his own career, but also damaged every organization and relationship he'd ever been part of. Amanda's fate was equally complete and satisfying. She'd plea bargained her criminal charges down to probation and community service, but the legal consequences were nothing compared to the social and professional destruction that followed her scandal. Amanda's graphic design business had collapsed entirely, and her attempts to find employment in the marketing field were consistently sabotaged by her reputation as someone who had advanced her career through sexual relationships rather than professional competence. No legitimate company wants to hire someone whose professional history includes affair-based promotions and conspiracy to commit fraud, explained Maria Santos, the executive recruiter who had blacklisted Amanda from consideration for any professional positions. Her name has become associated with workplace misconduct and ethical violations. Amanda was currently working at a retail chain for $12 per hour, living in a studio apartment, and driving a used car that barely passed inspection. The woman who had planned to upgrade from a failed husband to a successful CEO was struggling to pay rent while her former lover sat in federal prison. But the most poetic justice was Amanda's complete isolation from the social circles she'd once valued so highly. Her family had disowned her after the scandal, her college friends had blocked her on social media, and her attempts to rebuild social relationships were consistently sabotaged by people who'd Google her name and discover the full scope of her betrayal and fraud. Amanda Thompson had become synonymous with adultery, fraud, and betrayal in our social and professional community. She was a social pariah whose presence at any gathering would create awkwardness and uncomfortable conversations about ethics and trustworthiness. The contrast between our current situations was stark and satisfying. I was thriving professionally, financially, and personally, while both Richard and Amanda were facing the long-term consequences of their choices to prioritize their immediate gratification over basic human decency. But perhaps the most rewarding aspect of my victory was the life I'd built with Sarah, who had become my wife 6 months earlier in a ceremony that was everything my first marriage had pretended to be: honest, joyful, and built on mutual respect and genuine affection. "I'm proud how you handled everything," Sarah said as we celebrated our 6-month anniversary at the same restaurant where Amanda once lied to me about her whereabouts. "You didn't just survive their betrayal, you used it to become a better person and build a better life." Sarah was everything Amanda had never been: honest about her feelings, transparent in her communications, and genuinely supportive of my success rather than resentful of it. Our relationship was built on truth rather than manipulation, trust rather than deception, and mutual respect rather than exploitation. Sometimes I wonder if Richard and Amanda did me a favor, I reflected as we shared dessert in the same booth where I had once sat alone, trying to make sense of my wife's lies. If they hadn't betrayed me so completely, I might never have developed the strength to fight back, the wisdom to recognize manipulation, or the confidence to demand the respect I deserve. Our life together was everything I'd wanted my first marriage to be. We owned a beautiful house in the suburbs, larger and more elegant than the home Amanda and I had shared. We traveled frequently, pursuing shared interests rather than maintaining separate secret lives. Most importantly, we were building a future based on honesty and partnership rather than deception and competition. "The difference is that you learned from what happened to you," Sarah observed. "Instead of becoming bitter or cynical, you used their betrayal as motivation to become more successful, more ethical, and more confident. That takes strength that most people don't possess." As we drove home that evening, I thought about the Christmas party 2 years ago that destroyed my old life and created the foundation for my new one. In that ballroom, watching my wife kiss my boss, I thought my world was ending. Instead, it had been the beginning of the best chapter of my life. The naive husband who trusted his wife and respected his boss was gone, replaced by a successful executive who understood how power worked and knew how to protect himself from manipulation and abuse. Richard and Amanda thought they were destroying me, but they'd actually been creating someone much stronger, smarter, and more successful than the man they'd betrayed. The ultimate irony was that their cruelty had been the catalyst for my transformation from victim to victor. Their attempt to humiliate and destroy me had instead provided the motivation and knowledge I needed to build a life that was better in every measurable way than what I'd lost. 2 years later, I was living their punishment and my reward simultaneously, thriving while they suffered, succeeding while they failed, building while they destroyed themselves. Justice, I had learned, wasn't always swift, but it was ultimately inevitable for people who thought their power made them immune to consequences. And sometimes the sweetest victory was simply living well while watching your enemies destroy themselves through their own arrogance and cruelty.